I want to leave you tonight with three things. Number one, why it's important that we as a people always take risks and be adventurous. Number two, the outcome of those ventures don't always go as we plan them to. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they result in some damage, but that does not mean it's a failure. And finally, number three, in the face of the climate change that we're dealing with and the crisis that we're all constantly seeing every day, we have choices to make. We have decisions that can impact ourselves and those around us. We can keep on doing what we've always done, getting the same result every time, or we can choose to do something a little different, take a little risk, and be adventurous. As a young man, I was always very inquisitive. I questioned everything, everyone, and tested everything because I just didn't take anyone's word for it. And it's done me a lot of good in life. There are times when I probably should have been a little more reserved and not so careless, but it's a part of the learning process, I suppose. You can see where this is going. I was about 3 or 4 years old, and I remember this is a very traumatic experience, obviously, because I can still remember it pretty well. I had this crazy idea that somehow the keys and the socket went together. I could start the house up and drive it away. And you obviously not successful at that. And I'm trying to process this because I noticed there was energy that came out of this thing somehow because it made the lights come on. I mean, I knew stuff plugged into it and the vacuum cleaner ran. I knew it had some purpose or function. Something was in there that could pull this off. So in my deductive reasoning and rationale, I determined, I said, there's 2 slots in this thing. Maybe it takes 2 keys. Well, you can imagine where that got me. Needless to say, I did not succeed in driving the house away. I did succeed in driving my father up the stairs at breakneck speeds and as trying to determine what the loud bang and why the lights flickered. He discovers a startled 4-year-old with the fear of God in his face going, what in the world was that? And he figured it out. And I learned some respect for my father when he said not to do something, and that lasted a few hours. But I also learned that electricity it was energy. It could be, I didn't comprehend it in the words I'm doing now, but I knew that there was some way this stuff could be, it had a time and a place, and it was appropriate, and it could be used for something great. It could also be used for something destructive if you're not careful. So the rest is history. Fast forwarding through life, I, again, continued to question. And I was always bored in school. I absolutely hated school. I was bored in class. And the reason, I think, primarily was two reasons. Number one, when am I ever going to use this? Why do I need to know this? And it's because the teacher said so. When I asked him what that meant, read the textbook, which to me meant you don't know the answer. And then pretty much dismissed them at that point as being intellectually inferior. So on I went, never really taking anyone's word for anything and testing everything constantly. Senior year in high school. To give you an idea how great I was, I graduated high school with a 1.9988 GPA, which Mr. Meilinger, my principal, comes over and he says, Jason, he goes, just so you know, you have a 1.9988 GPA. And I'm like, you actually put those last 3 decimals in there on purpose. He goes, yeah, I had to. I said, well, he goes, well, Pennsylvania requires a 2.0 to graduate. And he said, for you, it's my discretion as the principal. For you, I'm willing to round it up. And also, he says, I want you out of here. So I go on to Penn State University. I'm studying pre-law there, and then which I really hated. I was bored. And it was kind of a continuation of high school. I really didn't get it. And I was there because Mom said if I didn't go to college, I was a loser. And I can appreciate in some respect what her intentions were. I was never doing anything I wanted to do. Then I switched over to international business. I couldn't pass economics because it was too math intensive there. And so that was kind of just left by the wayside. I had landed a software job I should back up. I got a job at a computer store, worked my way up to a software job. And by the late 90s, I was making pretty good money in the 90s tech boom. I'd gone on to Raytheon college to take because I just was not happy leaving the college thing closed. So I went back to college and said, okay, let me try something computer science-wise. Didn't like it at all because I was working on much better stuff, making much better money. I was already a professional in it. And I was like, why am I bothering to get a degree in this if I'm already doing it for a living? It was a waste of time. So hung that up, let it go. Had my own business for 2 years, sold that. Went to work for Adobe, still pretty bored there. And computers was something that should have stayed a hobby. I mean, it was great, it was fun, it was wonderful, but I should have left it there. And because it was something I fell into, but it was never really what my passion was. So moving forward, I started doing some soul searching. looking around, and one thing I always loved was marine science. I've always loved the ocean. I've always passionate about the ocean. And the first time I took a scuba diving course, I went out there into the Chesapeake Bay, and I remember seeing how much life existed in the coastal plain. I mean, there was just amazing amounts of just colors and fish and just all different sorts of things, and it was just fascinating. I was drawn and hooked from that point forward. I knew I wanted to go back to school, but this time for something I wanted to learn. So trying to figure out how I'm going to pay for that was another issue too, because obviously I'm not going to work if I'm going to go to school full time. And I'm already 20 years old at this point, so I've kind of missed a lot of 8-balls. I went ahead and looked in the military reserves, and I was like, okay, so I can get in the reserves and then use that to pay for college. I go ahead and start researching on all of those, and I wound up in the least likely of all places, the Coast Guard. The advantage of the Coast Guard, but I didn't even know it was a military branch at the time. I thought it was more of a, you were a lifeguard, you were more civilian type service. I had no idea. Did not know anything at all, how much it was involved in, how many countries we went to. Yeah, I was pretty ignorant, which has been the running gag all along. Obviously, I've learned some things the hard way. When I went to delayed entry in June of '01, passed MEPS, went back to college that fall. For the first time in my entire academic career, I was a straight A student. I loved what I was learning. I was having a blast, and I was really enjoying every minute of it. It was just great stuff. And just finding out, what all goes on in the scientific world is something I actually enjoyed. Now, granted, it's a little more competitive in the job market as opposed to a lawyer or a computer scientist, but that's okay. I was looking forward to actually enjoying what I do. Regrettably, my first semester, though, September 11th happened. I got a call from my recruiter. He says, hey, don't enroll in class in January. You're out of here. And I was like, okay, I'm shocked. Kind of knew that was coming. Had no idea what to expect from there because I went in, thinking I was just a reservist. And I think about half my company that went after graduation, a bunch of us went to our respective schools for our particular specialty. And about half the company went straight to the Persian Gulf. So much for Homeland Security. Everyone remembers the horrific day, if you know where you were at. I got activated for the Space Shuttle Columbia response. I never in a million years thought going into the Coast Guard, studying marine science, was going to have me going down to Texas to work on something that was so daunting. I mean, it was a sad day, it was an unfortunate event, but at the same time, it was a real honor and privilege to be a part of that. And I got to meet a Coast Guard astronaut. I didn't know the Coast Guard had astronauts, because there's a whole lot of coast in space, right? Yeah. So, neat experiences continue. I went to 17 countries in my time. I think only 3 of them were on the water. The rest were in Eastern Europe and Central Eastern Europe. I actually went to the Pentagon for briefings for work. This is after September 11th. They rebuilt it, of course. I never thought I would see the inside of that. Never thought I would just do it. I mean, none of this stuff really made a whole lot of sense. And when you're looking at it from the beginning going, wow, am I going to wind up here? And that's something I ever considered. My final duty station was in Colorado, which is only a 2-day drive from the beach. So we're getting a little bit warmer, maybe. Never thought that was going to happen. I went to weather school, worked in meteorology, worked in climatology, did quite a few things. But remember, this whole thing began pursuing marine science. So we've come like this big round circle of amazing detours, full of experiences I wouldn't trade for the world and don't regret at all. After the curtains closed on that, because career progression was getting difficult, I took a job with Raytheon as a civilian, and this time it's still in the same place, working in satellite operations, which is another thing I thought I would never expected to be doing. I was stared back in the face of my arch nemesis, boredom. I got bored. Some of my coworkers came to me. Some of them worked for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, a bunch of the big prime contractors, and said, hey, Jason, we're looking at starting up this private space venture. We're going to do a commercial venture to the moon to put a lunar habitat on the moon's surface. And the goal of this is to go from the moon to Mars instead of from Earth to Mars, which is actually, if you understand how the expense of going, it's a much more sustainable event to go from the moon to Mars, but however, you have to have a colony on the moon. That's not sustainable yet, or not practical, I should say, yet. A little bit expensive. My first thought of this was, guys, you're playing too many video games. Hey, there's no way a private company could go to the moon. It's absurd, it's crazy, it's not going to happen. Boy, was I ignorant to what commercial space was doing. This is 2011, mind you. SpaceX has one we'd all probably heard of at that point. I knew about them. I knew about a handful of others that were getting involved, but I didn't know how much of it had already gone forward. There was Bigelow Aerospace had an inflatable habitat made out of Kevlar that was already in orbit, and there are plans now for this big hotel. I'm thinking, man, okay, this is actually happening. Far more affordable, far more approachable. So I went to the gentleman, I said, okay, guys, I've done a little research. I'm going to get involved. And they said, okay, since you've done some research, we need somebody to be an R&D lead. I was like, all right. It sounds like right up my alley, a professional student. So I've definitely been that for a long time, and I'm not about to stop anytime soon, if ever. So I start doing my research and development, and they come back and, okay, we need to basically, what is it going to take to put a habitat on the moon's surface? I'm thinking, okay, well, I said, a boatload of money. Number one, I mean, all of this has to be commercially viable. People have to want to go here. And of course, the example here on the screen is just what a lunar habitat would look like. Aside from the challenges it presents to put this thing on the moon, making it sustainable, making it function, creating an environment that you can breathe, live, work, and hopefully sustain for a longer period of time. That looks kind of tiny to me. I said, no one's going to pay $250,000 for a plane ticket or a space fare to go to live in something that's tantamount to a submarine. That's just absurd. No one wants to breathe air out of a machine. No one wants to really sit there, and then you have one little tiny window to look back at Earth maybe, and you'll never get to go outside. Not economically viable at all, not commercially viable. So I pushed this, and you have to have a biosphere. We have to recreate everything. People want to breathe fresh air. You want to feel like you're still in touch with nature. Even if it's lunar nature, it's still nature. You want to feel like you're not inside of a machine and actually still in touch with what's around you, and that's not so isolated. So I propose that. A little more inviting, I think. We have to, the fun part about this is we get to replicate everything that happens on Earth in the biosphere on the lunar surface. And believe it or not, this is not Star Trek technology. This has been around since and some of it since the 50s and 60s even, from the space race actually began. Not all that new. It's being applied differently, but it's out there. And hydroponics is how you would grow your food. Hydroponics goes back to the hanged guards of Babylon. That's the oldest known record of when it was actually used. And think about how, that's ancient history, literally. I believe it's about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, give or take. And they were in the desert, and they were able to grow everything just fine. The same applications can happen there that can happen on the moon. Electrical power has got to be made a little differently. What's different here, everything we do is retrofitted to 110 or 220 depending on where in the world you live. We actually don't need that much. The majority of the devices we have in our home, like your cell phones, your smartphones, your tablet PCs, all of your lights and everything, really don't need that much power. But we're retrofitted to a grid that's been around since the 1920s. And that's actually creating a lot more loss than we realize. When you're dealing everything fresh and new and you don't have to retrofit to what's existing, you got the freedom to do what you want. Lighting up the ISS like they do right now with these LED lights is actually very, very effective. That's one power consumption they barely notice because it's so minimal. I think about 2 car batteries could do the entire thing and leave it on for long periods of time. One advantage you have in space is there's an option, depending on where you are on the moon, there's 24/7 sunlight, but that's not everywhere. But you do have a sustainable amount of ways of accessing energy. Here's an example of decentralization. When we take our own power, make it ourselves at a local scale, I actually have the very same solar panels on my back, and I can charge my cell phones, my tablets, and all that. The nice thing about growing food in your house with these individual hydroponic or aeroponic systems is that, A, it's very clean. You're not dealing with weeds. You're not dealing with pesticides. You're not dealing with dirt. And the food is healthy, nutritious, actually better for you than what we're getting out of the mass production farms that we deal with today. So it begs the question, why have we developed all this technology for space and we don't use it here when it came from here? Really, we don't have to make the impact on the environment that we do. And we can actually recreate this in a biosphere, but we can also do the same thing in our homes. And it's not expensive. Greener urban environment that I'd rather be in. And that's, again, very practical and easy to do. You're creating fresh air. You're freeing your independence. You're giving yourself your independence from the things that would impact you, like, for example, man-made disasters, natural disasters. We also, in this pandemic, how food became a shortage in some places. You really wouldn't care, because you go to your backyard, or in some cases with an urban garden, you can go in your kitchen or your balcony and get your fruit. It's right there. It always is. As long as it's alive, you're free to keep on eating. You're not impacted by those things. You're not impacted by GMOs or chemicals or any of the pesticide issues that we're dealing with. And the other nice thing about this, for the environment, it's better. We mow down hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland for farming that was otherwise natural green forest that should be preserved. So I leave you with this: choices to make. Historically, we can look back and see what civilizations have done time and time again. I love looking at ancient Rome. They were able to take water, run it uphill in their aqueducts with siphons that were powered by gravity. And there is no carbon footprint at all with that. Many of you may be familiar with the Angkor Wat temple. The civilization that built that, the Khmer society, or Khmer Empire, had an elaborate system of aqueducts that ran and irrigation canals, and they had their entire agricultural establishment built on that. A drought, well, it had lasted several hundred years, but a drought is what most archaeologists believe had destabilized them, and the place became deserted. They became dependent on what was already there rather than adapting to change. They weren't prepared for it. The infrastructure couldn't handle it, and down it went. All these have one thing in common. It's a single point of failure. And everything's contingent upon one. Everyone suffers equally. So, again, we have a choice to make. We can either keep on doing what we've always done and wind up like this, because it is a mathematical certainty. These things will happen. Droughts will happen. The climate will change. Sometime, whether who caused it is irrelevant. The fact is it's going to change. Are we going to be prepared? Do we want to be prepared? And what choice do we make? I leave you with this, one of my favorite quotes. Our problems cannot be solved with the same mindset that created them. Thank you.